Hello and welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, the critical thinker at large.
And this is Ruth McLeod, the Southern Atheist.
And we are presenting you with show number 7. We are rocking and rolling this week, a whole lot to talk about, so we're going to get right to it. You know, last week I actually had to cut out a whole news item we talked about because we just keep going and we get on these rolls and it's all so good. But
we look at our time and go, oh man, we've been talking for an hour and 45 minutes. We should probably stop.
Exactly. So that was Pale Blue giving us our music intro there, a local band that we want to give some love to. So I hope you all like that. And we're going to start our show with a couple of questions that we actually got, some comments and questions that we found pretty enjoyable. The first question is from John Ritson. He says, really enjoyable podcast. Are Scientology really claiming that they are trying to get L. Ron Hubbard a Nobel Prize? The slight detail that Nobel Prizes are not awarded to dead people unless they died after the award was announced, or else they would be handing them to Galileo, Newton, etc., would make this a particularly stupid lie to motivate their members. Okay, John, so what I know about this actually is that this was an old story. The Nobel Prize thing was something that was actually being pushed in the 80s when Hubbard was still alive and around. He died in January 1986. And I've never heard the entire time I was in Scientology, and I was professionally involved with it from 1985 forward. I started working there after 1987. I never heard anything about a Nobel Prize. The first time I ever heard anything about this was fairly recently in regards to this purification program that they have. They push this thing. And there was this idea at one time that a Nobel Prize is something he should have been awarded. That has come and gone. That window of opportunity is definitely closed.
Right.
So anyway, that's the story on that. The next question we have, and you'll have to forgive me because I'm not sure on this one. It's MB Blover or MBB Lover. Anyway, MBB Lover. Can we have you give us examples? This is to Ruth. Can we have you give us examples of 100% perfect organizations that have been around for centuries that you approve of because they have never done anything wrong and at the same time are perfect and have helped countless others? It's easy to point out the negative, much harder to prove or point out the positive. I do agree that churches should not be tax exempt and that cults like Scientology should be the first to go.
All right, so I don't really want to get too far into this one because this is kind of a classic argument that atheists get a lot. We don't like it because it's not perfect, so we must just be perfectionists and only care about things that are absolutely perfect. And we have no leeway for anybody to make any mistakes whatsoever. That's literally, I've been arguing about this one for years. Nothing is perfect. I'm aware of that. I'm not perfect. Pope isn't perfect. Christianity isn't perfect. Islam isn't perfect. Atheists are not perfect. I get it. There's a lot that I understand that religion does. So I get that they do good things for people. I get they're very comforting for people. I get that the Christianity or Catholic Church has been able to do charity drives and they do homeless things. They need, great, wonderful works for humanity. I get it. What I don't agree with for as far as religion goes, and especially this Pope representing a Catholic viewpoint, that abortions are wrong, people in Africa cannot have condoms even though it's going to save them from AIDS. There's a lot of social issues that I do not agree with this Pope. And the fact that he's standing in front of Congress, giving an address, and he did say a few things that were great, fantastic. Finally, the Catholic Church is starting to say a few things that many people in the secular realm or other scientific realms have been saying for decades. Great. Fantastic. I'm not going to say that I'm pro-Pope now. That's not in me. I respect the person. I respect all human beings because I am a humanist. I am not going to say that he's a great, wonderful person because I don't know him. All I know is his Catholic background. And as a woman, as someone who is a humanist and I support getting rid of awful diseases in third world countries, I can't support the man other than going, yay, thanks for finally catching up. So that's all I'm going to say about that one.
Fair enough. And we will definitely be talking a little bit more about the Pope and his American visit a little bit later in the show. So I wanted to also recognize her name is Mel, and she brought up an extremely good point, and one that I haven't yet made on the show, but which needs to be made in terms of some sensible speaking here. You know, often when atheism is brought out, or, criticism of religion is brought out, it is countered with science. And the idea of science as its own form of religion comes up, and that is, I have to admit, is definitely is something that happens, with some people who, again, I'm going to say that the type of person who would fall into that sort of thinking would not be a very critical thinker and would not be somebody who actually understands science for what it really is.
I feel like I should make this point. Science is not perfect.
Exactly.
Now that I just went on my little speech there.
Well, and it's a point that needs to be made, and
of course.
and it's certainly something that I want people to know, that we understand here, that it's not a matter of black and white thinking like we were talking about last week, where, well, if it's not religion, it's science. And that's just another form of black and white thinking. And Mel actually made some really good points in her email. It's quite long, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. But she says this: I recognize that many atrocities have been performed in the name of religion, and most likely will continue to be. I personally feel that neither science nor religions are good or bad. Unfortunately, people use these topics to justify all types of repugnant actions. It is worth noting that, I am sad to say, there have been a number of cases where atrocities have been committed in the name of science. Science is upheld as dealing with and determining only unbiased facts, when the truth in a number of cases, just like religion, people have used their interpretation, bias, and goals to harm and deceive people in the name of science. And that argument holds for any subject. Mm-hmm. And it's not just a counter argument against science or against religion. I've only seen this brought up in terms of, oh yeah, well, religion's bad, well, so is science, because people are human and they make mistakes, and therefore there is nothing absolutely good. And it's like, well, yeah, that's kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So it's not, this isn't a protest argument against, critical thinking or against logic or reason. In fact, it's the application of critical thinking to science, which needs to be made. So it was a point I wanted to bring up here. And Mel makes a lot of other specific points about where science has gone wrong. And she pointed out one thing I thought was very fascinating, just as a point of historical interest. I didn't know Agent Orange was a compound that was developed by a guy named Arthur Galsto, who did it. He developed this compound as a way to improve crop yields. And he developed this stuff that worked so well, and he was so altruistic in what he was doing, he didn't even patent it.
Right.
Well, it turns out that the little compound he developed was a little bit, went a long way. You use a little bit, you get bumper crops. You use a lot, you get Agent Orange.
Yeah.
And that is, can you say, well, that's science? That's Galsto's fault? Well, no. I would never lay the burden of all the deaths in Vietnam on Arthur Galsto.
Right. Well, I mean, there's a difference here. This man wasn't trying to make a horrible gas weapon, but there are many medical atrocities that happened that did lead to some of the medical advancements that we have now. World War II, Dr. Mendel and the Nazis did horrible experiments, but we still use a lot of the technology that came out of that today. Aspirin, Bayer, things like that.
Well, rocket science was developed by the Germans.
Right.
I mean, the V2 rocket and whatnot. I mean, that's how we ended up getting the developments that evolved into putting people on the moon.
What I see as the difference here, we are constantly having scientific ethics being placed on us, ethical understandings, ethical classes. I mean, I've taken a few ethics classes. I'm sure a lot of people have. We need to learn from our mistakes, and I feel like in the science realm we do that a lot. And sure, religious mistakes have been made, and I'm sure a lot of, I mean, the Crusades are not still happening. They understand it, and, you know, they also see it. You know, science will say, okay, that was ethically wrong. Let's try not to do that again. Christianity and a lot of religions, and I'd say Christianity because that's the one that I know the most. They'll say, yeah, that was wrong, but it had to be done. You know.
Well, I've certainly found that in my own experience as in a destructive cult, and certainly, and in my experience of religions, that they are much slower to admit that they were wrong, and much faster to justify bad behavior
if they do it at all.
With, well, the guy had good intentions. Right.
Or it was done in the name of God. You see that a lot.
Right.
Definitely.
Right. And so, you know, this sort of thing, right? Actually, you know, she actually says something else in her email that really goes along with this. She says, she talked about the fact that in chemistry, you know, you can have blunders that can lead to real bad effects. And she said, at least today, these examples that she cited are taught to chemistry students as cautionary tales of the harm scientists have done. And they're taught to scientists up and coming so that they won't repeat those mistakes, that they will learn from those earlier mistakes, right? So Mel goes on to say, how much better would the world be if religious scholars informed their students of the harmful effect their religion has had on the world and used this as a mark in the sand to move with more caution from. And I don't know, not having sat in on any religious classes outside of my high school education, whether that's ever done or not.
You know, in the classes that I grew up in my religion, they didn't touch on it at all. Because as far as we were concerned, we didn't do any of that.
Well, there's a certain degree of infallibility, divine righteousness.
Well, there's definitely a lot of bad things happen in the Bible because God needed it to happen, or had a will.
It was God's will, God's plan.
Yeah,
God's plan.
And you know, people will come back and say, "Oh, well, what if God asked you to murder your neighbor or your kid or something?" And they'll come back and say, "God would never do that, even though He's totally done it in the past."
Right.
That's what you'll get. You won't get any kind of, this was terrible, let's try not to do that again. I had none of that.
Right. I think maybe a key difference here is just occurring to me is between science and religion in this regard, is that people don't feel responsible for the things that have happened in religion because they were decreed by God, and that's utterly out of your hands. Whereas when you look back at the works of man or the works of science, you're looking at things that people did. God didn't decree that the polio vaccine would be invented, and God didn't decree that Agent Orange would be invented. Those are all man-made works, right? And so we can look back on those with a more of a sense of responsibility, regret, and a determination to not do those again. Because we were the ones who did it, and we knew we were the ones who did it.
Right. I actually, in my personal blog, I actually just wrote something about this.
Really?
About how, as secular people, myself, I have to be accountable today for my actions against people. And I have to be, like, if I hurt you directly, I would have to be accountable to you. I would have to ask for your forgiveness and somehow rectify what I've done. Whereas if someone is religious and they do something wrong, sure, they can try to rectify with you, but a lot of times you'll see them say, oh, well, I prayed to God and He forgave me.
That's another very good point on this, is they're not seeking restitution with you. They're seeking restitution with their God.
Right.
Well, God forgave me, so therefore you should.
Right. You'll see that a lot. And you know, we're seeing that right now with the whole Kim Davis thing where, you know, a lot of people are attacking her because of her previous marriages and her children out of wedlock. Her interview recently that she did with Megyn Kelly on Fox.
I only saw a picture of her crying. I'm so done with Kim Davis.
I did not, but I'm
only done with Kim Davis.
I'm only bringing it up for a point here. She basically said, you know, that doesn't matter. I'm not a hypocrite because I asked for God's forgiveness and He gave it to me.
Right.
So she doesn't have to be immediately accountable because she feels that her God has forgiven her.
I'm going to ask our listeners out there, what's your take on this? I'm actually really interested to know. For those of you out there who are religiously minded, what do you think about this idea of accountability and responsibility, and what we're talking about here in science versus religion? I'm not interested in arguments against or for science or against or for religion. That's not my point. I'm wondering about this business of personal responsibility. Mm-hmm. And how do you, as a religious person out there, deal with this? If God forgives you, are you done? Or do you try to make restitution? Do you try to contact people you've harmed? Or
I would hope
what?
a lot of them would try to get restitution with the actual person that they've harmed. And I feel like I was brought up in a home that taught me to do that. Mm-hmm. But there's also this concept of the bigger picture. Again, I hate to do it. I know we're done with her. But Kim Davis feels that
she's the gift that keeps on giving.
She's a great asset right now to all of my arguments because she's the perfect picture of everything that's wrong right now. Mm-hmm. She's denying rights for people based on what she believes, and she should be denying herself, but she has somehow asked for forgiveness. And it just doesn't correlate into a logical concept, right? Of, well, I did wrong, but I asked for forgiveness and God forgave me, but you're still doing wrong and I'm going to judge you for it.
Right.
It doesn't match.
There is a certain degree of hypocrisy there.
Absolutely.
Which we can all find very disturbing.
Right.
All right. That being said, we're going to move on to our next segment. Martin Shkreli is the owner of a company called Turing. He has been called by the BBC News the most hated man in America. Bloomberg Business opted for the adjective notorious when describing Shkreli's business history. The Daily Beast said Shkreli is Big Pharma's biggest asshole. And more than one publication, including the Washington Post, has referred to him as a bro with various modifiers. But Martin Shkreli's claim to fame last week was that he was featured in a New York Times article as the owner of the company that raised the price of a drug 4,000%.
From $13.50 to $750 per pill.
Despite all of the adjectives and modifiers and ways that we're talking about this guy, here's what he had to say about himself. Quote, "Our first and primary stakeholder is patients. There's no doubt about that," he said on CBS. He said that the price of the drug had been so low that, quote, any company selling it would be losing money, and that at the new price there would be a, quote, reasonable profit, not excessive at all. He then said, "I can see how it looks greedy, but I think there's a lot of altruistic properties to it."
I don't think he knows what that word means.
Turing, which is the name of Shkreli's company, has a history of business practices and antics that have made Shkreli the subject of regulatory inquiries from the very start of his career. He's a former hedge fund manager who moved a few years ago from the world of buying and selling biotechnology stocks to the industry that created them. Now, this is a well-educated guy who actually skipped grades in school, according to this article. So it's pretty fair to say that when he uses the word altruistic, he actually does understand what he's saying. The altruism to which Shkreli refers is this: the price increase and the profits it creates would be used to research and develop alternative treatments for toxoplasmosis that cause fewer side effects. Now, toxoplasmosis is the disease that this particular drug in question resolves, and apparently it resolves it within a month or two of taking the medication. So here you are, up until this guy raised the price, you were taking your medication at $13.50 a day. Well, now you're taking your medication at $750 a day. And if that's not an outrageous and insane price increase, well, I think Hillary Clinton even got it right on this one, calling it price gouging. My take on this, I think that this is representative of a very large problem, of which this is really only a tip of the iceberg.
I did some math really fast. At the $13.50 a day, you would take one pill a day. That's how the usual dosage would go. And you would take that every day for about 6 weeks. Little in between $500, $600 total. With this price increase, you're looking at about between $29,000 and $30,000
right,
for a 6-week treatment.
And the word he chose was altruistic. I think Shkreli has a very interesting worldview.
That's, and for my regular daytime 9-to-5 job, I cost out medications for clients, for our case management clients. And I always cost out medication cash cost, meaning out of pocket, someone without insurance. And that's what these costs are. These are out of pocket without insurance prices. So insurance companies will actually take these costs and be able to negotiate them and haggle and things like that. So most people who have insurance will still probably pay their premium or their copay for their medications that they have. My concern about medicines jumping in cost like this is you're going to start having insurance companies either denying access to things or cutting your access to them. I've seen this with our clients and even some of my coworkers, where a insurance doc will basically say, you don't really need this medication. So I know your doctor wrote a script for you, but we're only going to fill about half of it. So unfortunately, that does happen within our healthcare system. And I've seen medication cost this much before. What happens is no one else can make a generic for these pills because they'll put a patent on them. And the patent will be good for a few years. And then when that runs out, then you can start having generic options. But what pharmaceutical companies also do is every few years, they tweak their formula a tiny little bit. So that means they can renew their patent. So that means no one can put a generic on it. So, our healthcare system is laughable because we do things like this.
Yet at the same time, you almost want to cry.
Yes, definitely one of those things where you have to remind yourself that here in the U.S. we live in a first world country, yet our medical system is limping along on 2 broken legs that can't heal itself because it can't afford to go to the doctor.
Exactly.
And it's sad.
Very much so. And unfortunately, I referenced Wall Street, the movie, earlier. Mm-hmm. This speech that Gecko gives. Of course, he's named after a lizard, right? Where he basically makes the point, in summary, that the fact that the fat cats at the top of the organization are making all this money and nobody is, creating a profit for the company is ruining the stockholders, is ruining the company, and all forward progress is being hampered by, these bigwigs at the top. So the point he makes in this speech is that greed is good because greed is what sucks up more profits, more money, more work. He says greed is right. Greed works. Greed clarifies, cuts through, and captures the essence of the evolutionary spirit. Greed in all of its forms, greed for life, for money, for love, knowledge, has marked the upward surge of mankind. And I only bring this up because Martin Shkreli has substituted the word altruism for what Gordon Gekko in the 80s more honestly said was greed.
Yeah.
And I think that itself is kind of a statement on where we've come in the last 30 years in the business world. And it's not a good place. Mm. So there's a trend that we've noticed with Christians wearing and promoting themselves as infidels. And this was too good of an opportunity to pass up. So we have to talk about this. Now, the reason why, in case you're wondering out there what I'm talking about and why it is that I would be making fun of a Christian calling themselves an infidel with pride, is because the word infidel, and apparently, and by the way, this is money is being made on this. There's mugs, there are T-shirts, there are patches. People have taken the word infidel written in Arabic and put it next to the word in English and sewn it on their shirt. Proud to be an infidel. Now, here's the sick joke about this. The word infidel literally means unfaithful. So when you have a bunch of Christians running around with the word infidel smiling, with the word infidel written on their shirts, posing for group photos as though they're making some anti-Islam statement, what they're actually doing is proudly announcing that they are a bunch of unfaithful religious nuts.
And it's literally in the Bible, too. It talks about infidels in the Bible. It's not just in the Quran. And I giggle about this. This is hilarious. And if you have a few minutes, please go to Google and look up. Like, I'm looking at a sign right now of a woman she's at the U.S. border for whatever reason. And she's saying, I am the infidel Allah warned you about. Yeah. She's not trying to be an atheist or anything right now. This is a Christian
movement.
Yeah.
This is a whole push amongst Christians to do this.
Oh, and now, this is obvious. Go home and take Obama with you. I mean,
right. Now, just to clear this up fully, this is right out of Wikipedia. Infidel is a term used in certain religions for those who do not believe the central tenets of one's own religion, are members of another religion, or are not religious. Now, but here's the thing. Infidel is an ecclesiastical term in Christianity around which the church developed a body of theology that deals with the concept of infidelity. Hey, yeah. How many of you knew that?
I didn't make the connection in my head. Who knew?
That's right, which makes a clear differentiation between those who were baptized and following the teachings of the church versus those who are outside the faith. The term infidel was used by Christians to describe those perceived as the enemies of Christianity. So, Christians, if you're running around out there with a shirt that says infidel on it, all you're doing is saying, I am my own worst enemy. Please, wake up.
You're making the secular people laugh, and I'm sorry, we are laughing at it.
I'm sorry, hilarious. But it is rather funny. So,
I mean, I want one of the shirts, but that would make sense.
Yeah, if we were wearing the shirts, that would be a whole nother thing. You are listening to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. Isn't it about time someone made some sense around here? Our next story is actually the top news story for this week. It has been broadcast, rebroadcast, continually broadcast in nonstop quadrophenia across CNN's Newsline feed channel.
Local news.
Local, international, national, every level, all across the Twitter sphere, all across the Facebook feeds. What else could I be talking about? The Pope.
Of course.
Now, the Pope made a historic first visit to the United States this week. He addressed Congress. He addressed the United Nations. He stopped and blessed a bunch of kids and rode around in the Pope-mobile.
No, he was in a Fiat.
Oh.
He was in a Fiat.
Well, I saw him also riding in the Pope-mobile.
Is he in the Pope?
Yes, I saw him in that.
Bulletproof glass and everything?
Yeah. Although he had the sides open, which I was surprised by.
Yeah, because, he's the people's Pope.
Yeah, well.
Whatever.
He addressed Congress directly in person, and there were some quotes from his speech that I went through that I'd like to bring up here because they sort of highlight the good and the bad with this man. Ruth and I actually had some contention over this. As you know from last week, Ruth is completely, thoroughly, and totally unimpressed by the Pope. And quite honestly, so am I. The reason why I feel that the Pope is important, probably more so than I think Ruth does, is because I feel that as arguably the most powerful religious leader on the planet, he is somebody that quite literally millions of people listen to. And they don't just listen to him as maybe he gave some decent advice. They listen to him with rapt attention and literally follow his every word. And that's important because that means that he influences a lot of thought out there.
Yeah, I would like to point out here that I don't disagree with you on that point. I definitely understand that a lot of people listen to him and take to heart what he says. Fantastic. A lot of people listen to Kim Kardashian. Fantastic. But I do get the difference. I know what you're going to do right now. I get the difference between a pope and a freaking Kardashian. I get it.
Well, the difference is, and an important one, because actually that is a very good analogy.
Yeah.
Right? But the big difference is that Kim Kardashian, rightly or wrongly, good or bad, is a celebrity. Mm-hmm. Right? She is celebrated because of her existence. Right? That's celebrity. Right? That's what the word, that's as far as I know, that's what the word means. The Pope is not a celebrity. The Pope is a religious leader. So he is regarded by his followers with awe and as the voice, literally, the voice of God. Mm-hmm. So there's a little difference in the level of seriousness connected with the man. However, you and I actually agree on the fact that he's just a guy.
Yeah.
And when you take the religious overtones off of it and you sort of remove the reverence and remove the solemnity of it, he really is just another guy who walks around in robes and a funny hat and makes pronouncements. He just happens to be somebody that a lot of people listen to. And he is a political dignitary in that he is the head of the Vatican, which is its own country.
Right.
So there is some political clout there.
Right.
Now, should the Pope be making political statements? Should the Pope be making economic statements? Well, I actually believe that anybody can be making political statements and economic statements, and it would be odd if he didn't have opinions on it, didn't voice those opinions.
Right.
Fair enough. I'll give him the right to have those opinions.
Of course.
I, along with you, don't particularly agree that Congress should be listening to his opinions more so than other people, except for this one little fact. Millions of people listen to the guy. And therefore, he sways voters, he sways constituency across both party lines, and he has international sway.
Right, but I think you're kind of giving him leeway because he said a few things that you agree with. That's what I think is happening. I think if he only stood up there and only talked about how he's against abortion and gay marriage, this would have been, razzle, rabble, rabble.
Well, here's the real reason why we're even talking about this at all is because I am trying to acknowledge the fact that there is a positive gain of some kind being made from a corner of the world that has classically been viewed as repressive and very anti-science and very anti-progressive viewpoints. And while he has a long way to go, and we're going to talk about that, I am acknowledging that there has been some positive noises being made by him, and I only grant that importance because those positive noises sway so many other people.
Did it have to be done in Congress? Absolutely not. I do not think that he went there as a political dignitary from another country.
No, not at all. He was definitely the Pope.
No, the fact that he went there and addressed the Congress as a religious leader is incredibly offensive to me as a secular person who's supposed to be living in a secular country. And I don't feel that because he had one or two rays of hope in there as far as climate change and things, I don't feel it. I should be jumping for joy right now.
Fair enough.
All right.
Well, we'll talk about the specifics now of what he did say that we can agree and disagree with. And if nothing else, it's certainly newsworthy.
Sure.
So he gave a very interesting speech. He basically appealed to our history, the United States, and cited various historical figures to make points about freedom, political responsibility, tolerance, and working together for the common good. He touched on immigration, abortion, the death penalty, homelessness and poverty, climate change, and family. Mm-hmm. There was some good and some bad in this. So I'll go over a couple of quotes here. It was interesting for me to see, given some of the conservative outrage against the Pope, that John Boehner, the Republican House Majority Leader, was actually tearing up visibly both during his congressional address and outside when the Pope was addressing the masses outside of the White House. And that surprised me. And I maybe it shouldn't have.
I did not see this. I would.
No,
really
he
like
was
to
he
see
was
a
tearing
picture
up.
of
He was
this.
pulling out his handkerchief and
No,
wiping his eyes.
I don't disbelieve you.
Yeah.
I would like to see if it looks fake or not.
No, it actually looked heartfelt as far as I could tell.
Oh.
And he did get a couple standing ovations from Congress at a couple key points in the address. I won't go over those, but I will read some points he makes. He admitted to problems with religious fundamentalism, and this is what he had to say about that. Quote, "All of us are quite aware of and deeply worried by the disturbing social and political situation of the world today. Our world is increasingly a place of violent conflict, hatred, and brutal atrocities, committed even in the name of God and of religion. We know that no religion is immune from forms of individual delusion or ideological extremism. This means that we must be especially attentive to every type of fundamentalism, whether religious or of any other kind. A delicate balance is required to combat violence perpetrated in the name of a religion, an ideology, or an economic system, while also safeguarding religious freedom, intellectual freedom, and individual freedoms. But there is another temptation on which we must especially guard against, the simplistic reductionism which sees only good or evil, or, if you will, the righteous and sinners. The contemporary world, with its open wounds which affect so many of our brothers and sisters, demands that we confront every form of polarization which would divide it into these two camps. We know that in the attempt to be freed of the enemy without, we can be tempted to feed the enemy within. To imitate the hatred and violence of tyrants and murderers is the best way to take their place. That is something which you, as a people, reject." I wonder if he listened to our show last week.
About the whole black and white thinking.
Well, that's exactly what this is all about.
Right.
And it's a decent statement to be made by a religious leader on the fact that black and white thinking exists, that it is a danger, because you and I have certainly quoted from no shortage of stories since we started this, pushed by religious fundamentalists, that fundamentalism and black and white thinking is a very good thing, that it's something that Christ wants. It's something that God wants. And here he is, the voice of God, saying, hey, let's not be doing that. That's not the way to go. So I thought a little kudo in his direction was appropriate for that statement. Ruth just shakes her head at me.
I don't disagree with a lot of what he said. I don't disagree. I think it's fantastic that he's finally saying it. Yay. I just don't like the whole concept that he's like a great, wonderful person now. We have to, love him because he's finally saying things. No. He still represents a very repressive religion in my eyes, and this is just my personal opinion. And
well, yours and many others.
Yeah.
And you have some good points to be made on this, which we'll get to. Another quote coming out of his congressional speech here is, he gave an ideal of what religion should be, but I think we all have to acknowledge that this is not necessarily what it is. Now, as a religious leader, it's his job to set the forward motion and progress and goals of his religion. So I don't deny him his vision, but it's an interesting statement he makes here. In this land, the various religious denominations have greatly contributed to building and strengthening society. It is important that today, as in the past, the voice of faith continue to be heard, for it is a voice of fraternity and love, which tries to bring out the best in each person and in each society. Such cooperation is a powerful resource in the battle to eliminate new global forms of slavery, born of grave injustices which can be overcome only through new policies and new forms of social consensus. Again, I think that's a nice mission statement, but it's not necessarily a reflection of actual reality of what religion really is in a practical sense. It's more of what we kind of wish it was.
yeah, that is what I was taught religion was supposed to be. To a lot of people, religion is all the nice, happy, wonderful, let's love one another, great comfort, being a good to the world. Absolutely. Great. Okay. The problem is, it's not. For many people.
And that's the problem with human nature, is we take something that is basically good, basically a nice mission statement or a nice purpose, and our passions and our emotions stir into it, and we have to take sides, and we have to feel that our needs or our desires or our views are more important, are better than other people's.
Right.
And that divisiveness is where religion and, frankly, almost every other subject we get our hands involved in.
That's because humans are not perfect. We're not meant to be. I mean, we're not meant to be anything. We just are.
Right.
But the problem is religion tries to be this perfect entity, but it can't be.
It's an unreachable goal. That's right. It's an absolute. It's unobtainable.
No society, and this is from somebody who studies society, we're not perfect. None of this is out there. I have to reiterate, there's no such thing as perfect. It's not happening. Even your perfect spot in your bed is eventually going to make your pinky toe have a problem and everything has to move. And religion is not perfect. And I can give it a pass on a lot of things. There are some things that just will not work for me personally, and that's why I'm an atheist.
And that should, in the end, be completely fine with anybody who's got religion. Mm-hmm. And where it's not is where we have a problem, right? It's
not okay with anybody, any religious person, that there's atheists out there. That's not okay for them. It's not.
Okay.
On a religious level, it's not.
Okay.
I'm not supposed to be an atheist, according to them, and it's.
Well, I definitely know a few people who consider themselves religious, mm-hmm. and even Christians,
right,
who are totally fine with the fact that I'm not.
Yeah, they can say that all they want. Their religion is supposed to tell them that we need to be converted. That's what I'm telling you.
Got it. Okay, I understand your point now.
There you go.
All right, now we're going to move into a couple shorter quotes here from the Pope, where here's my problem with these quotes and the things that he bothered to make the point, but he didn't bother to make the point openly or bluntly. He used verbiage here, which you'll hear, which is sort of very agreeable sounding noises that actually say something very disagreeable. For example, quote, "The Golden Rule also reminds us of our responsibility to protect and defend human life at every stage of its development." And of course, here he's making a surprise religious statement of belief about the sanctity of all life at every stage of development, i.e., from the point of conception forward, right? And he is invoking the Golden Rule as something to follow so that there is an anti-abortion message mixed in here.
Well, a fetus would never kill me. Why would I kill it? Obviously.
So, he took the time to make the statement, but he aligns it with something that I thought was a little sneaky.
Well, it's good PR. I mean, you don't want to immediately piss off half the country, obviously. So he has to say it in like these twisted, tiptoey ways.
Right, exactly.
But we all know what he means if you really think about it.
Well, and coming right on the heels of that, our last quote from his speech here has to do with a little stab at gay marriage, where he says, "It is my wish that throughout my visit the family should be a recurrent theme. How essential the family has been to the building of this country, and how worthy it remains of our support and encouragement. Yet I cannot hide my concern for the family, which is threatened perhaps as never before, from within and without. Fundamental relationships are being called into question, as is the very basis of marriage and the family. I can only reiterate the importance and, above all, the richness and the beauty of family life."
Dear religious people, you do not have a monopoly on marriage. You did not start it. You are not going to end it. You do not define it. Marriage was not defined by religion. at all. Signed, Ruth.
And Chris. I could not agree with you more on this. This is stepping into an area where he really doesn't need to be going, and it's such a basic human right to be with who you want to be with,
right?
To share your life with who you love, and for somebody literally a papal decree to say otherwise is so much meaningless tripe.
Right.
Because a family is a family because the people in the family agree it's a family.
Right.
So what, foster homes aren't families because they're not blood related? Adopted children are not part of a family because they weren't born into it naturally? Like, at what point do you arbitrarily draw a line? Now, apparently, the line is drawn at sex, right? At gender. And I cannot and will not ever agree that makes any sense at all.
I grew up with a single mom. It was her and myself and my two sisters. We were an awesome family. I think I came out just fine, except for the fact that I'm an atheist. My mother thinks I came out just fine too, except for the fact that I'm an atheist. Maybe that's because I didn't have my father around. Who knows?
Well, it certainly wasn't for lack of religious education.
That's true. But, I mean, in our foster system in the United States, we have over 400,000 children who are just in the system. Many of them just age out. I would happily love to have a gay couple adopt a child, or 17, whatever, fine. As long as they can give a proper home for these children, I don't see what the big deal is. And I would rather have a child go to a loving home, a family who literally had to jump through so many hoops to be able to even adopt a child. That's somebody who wants one. Why deny these children this? Why have them stay in a system that's going to lose track of them, that's going to not give them any kind of help or support as soon as they hit 18?
Well, the plain truth of the matter, if we're really going to talk turkey about this, is that by stating that the family is threatened as never before from within and without, what they're actually doing is contributing to keeping families from forming.
Absolutely.
And keeping the family from even being a family by denying the rights of gay couples, for example, to adopt or have their own children.
Right.
Which is completely 100% possible now. And there's nothing wrong with that. Love is love.
Right.
And it's a little bit outrageous to me that the most powerful religious leader in the world feels it's his duty to step into and judge people on this point. And this is where I think he really loses the plot, more so than on almost anything else, is in the area of sex and sexual regulations. They're still totally in the dark ages on this. And this is where the Pope needs to get a clue and bring the Catholic Church out of the Middle Ages. And if we wanted to see real reform that was meaningful, significant, and world-changing, we would see the Catholic Church reform its attitudes about sex and sexual regulation. And that would be a day I think even you would acknowledge that the Pope has done something good.
Maybe. I wouldn't hold my breath.
But until then, despite his positive noises, which were positive noises, and I do acknowledge that, and I think anybody would say that I definitely gave the guy some kudos for that, he still has a long way to go.
Absolutely.
And as a person who leads the charge for millions of people out there, he has a responsibility to move the Catholic Church out of the Middle Ages.
Well, and I will give you this. I think that he does have a lot more progressive ideas than what he says. There's a lot of Catholicism politics that are happening that are keeping him from being able to say a lot of things. I wonder
don't know. That's a good point to wonder about. It's something we would have to look into because I, of course, thought the Pope, I think everybody kind of has this idea that the Pope is, sort of the Word of God and that's, what he says goes. But, people are people, systems are systems, hierarchies are hierarchies, and so you're probably absolutely right that there
I really
are
do think
various
there's some
pressures.
politics there.
You know,
I do.
And you're probably absolutely right, but he needs to move this forward. He needs to take this ball that he's gotten rolling down the street here, and he needs to give it a good, solid kick into the present moment.
And, you know, I will say this for the last time. I do think he has done some very good things for the Catholic Church by coming to terms with stuff that we already knew.
So you weren't following when he was going in and out of the building and getting into his car and, you know, I mean, CNN was basically doing Pope Watch the whole week.
I tweeted my local news station to ask them to tell me the news and weather at 7:30 in the morning, because all I can get on every single news channel was the Pope standing next to the president. Dude looked like he was half asleep, and they were just standing there with music playing. It's like, please, I need to go to work. Tell me what I-25 is like, please.
Right. Yeah, I thought that was kind of amusing. All right, we are going to move on to our next segment.
Great.
What are you talking about? What are you talking about? What are you...
This week, we're going to pick back up on the subject of guns and gun rights and gun control. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, and we got some really nice feedback from a few folks on this.
Thank you for that, by the way.
Absolutely. And, you know, on all of the things that we're talking about, we want your feedback. Now, on this particular issue, I specifically asked, what did you guys think about gun control? And somebody came back very, very spot on. The real problem with mass shootings and with gun violence is not so much the gun as it is the mental health of the person doing the shooting. This has been talked about, but I don't know that it's been talked about enough. Again, we have a situation where nothing effective is being done, and that's because the root of the problem, which is mental health, is so poorly understood. Now, of course, having been involved with Scientology for so many years, I thought we had the problem nailed with Dianetics, the modern science of mental health from 1950. And I thought that was nailing the cause of psychosis and the cause of sociopathy and that sort of thing. But of course, that was all just a con. So that we just can throw all that aside. And what are we left with? Well, modern psychology and modern psychiatry and big pharma. None of which really seem to have a handle on the subject of what causes insanity, how to control insanity, or how to prevent insanity. And so you have people who look normal, can even put on a facade of normal enough to go fill out a gun application or register a gun or, you know, purchase a gun and do all the normal things you're supposed to do with them, and yet then go and kill a bunch of people with them.
And are you using insanity here as like a catch-all for mental?
I'm using insanity in terms of the kind of person who would go with a gun into a shopping mall or a McDonald's or a post office and lay waste to all the people they can find before, you know, maybe laying waste to themselves. I think that is a form of insanity. I don't know a better word to describe that behavior. Yeah. And if you want to talk about a subject that people are apathetic and dejected and hopeless about, it's mental health.
Yeah.
Right.
It ties into not only our stigma of mental health in our country, it also ties in with our disabled health system. I'm just going to go ahead and call it that for the rest of my life until it's fixed.
The health system that we have here, but also any country's health system. No country has this taped. No country has this nailed.
Yeah, of course not.
Australia doesn't have this nailed. Sweden doesn't have this nailed. All you Swedish pushers out there, I keep on seeing all these memes about how wonderful everything is over in Sweden.
Oh, I'm moving there.
Yeah. Okay.
Eventually.
Yeah. Well, they don't have a handle on this either. Crazy people do crazy things, and there's some percentage of people out there who are just crazy, and they're not visibly or noticeably crazy. Mm-hmm. And so they get sold guns, and then they go do things with them. Now, there's this idea out there that, well, if it wasn't the gun, it would be a knife or a car or an axe or, you know, this sort of thing. There's a certain validity to that argument, Guns, of course, are instruments of violence with no other purpose than to inflict bodily harm. That's what they were made for.
Right.
Axes are tools, knives are tools, a car is a tool for transportation. These things, an unintended consequence of a car is that it can kill somebody. Well, it's not an unintended consequence of a gun.
As someone who didn't grow up around guns but has a pro-gun concept in my head, guns were meant as tools.
Tools of violence.
Hunting tools, protection tools, things like that. I'm not defending what your argument just was. I'm just giving you the devil's advocate.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, they are used for hunting and they are used for sport, but the truth of the matter is that those were almost unintended consequences of guns, because guns were invented specifically to kill other people. That's what they were invented for.
Right.
A car was not invented to kill somebody. A knife was not invented to kill somebody. It was an implement, literally, to cut things, not cut other people.
Right.
Cut meat, cut leaves, cut grass, right? So you do have a rather unique tool with a unique purpose in a gun. And so there's a valid argument to be made as to whether those should be more closely regulated than cars, knives, hammers, or other instruments that could be used for violence, but their purpose is not violence. So that's still a part of the argument too. I'm not trying to shift attention off of guns and say guns are not part of the problem. I'm simply saying that if we're going to get to real root causes and real situations, we're going to have to deal with the hand that holds the gun, and that hand is controlled by a mind, and when that mind is unstable or insane, there's nothing you can do to get that person to not commit violence.
Right.
And that's where our real target has to be. And so I think mental health reform, mental health education, mental health study it needs a adrenaline injection, the like of which I don't think we've really seen before. Are we incapable of solving this problem, or have we just not put enough resources into it to solve it?
I touched on the concept of the stigma earlier, and there definitely is a huge stigma about it. We use it as an insult to people who maybe they don't agree with us. What are you, crazy?
Of course we do, yeah.
Yeah, and then it's not mental illness, whether it's schizophrenia, whether it's hallucinations, whether it's depression. We don't treat it as an illness that we would if it was somebody who had a broken hand, if it was somebody who had internal bleeding. We don't treat it the same.
And we don't, because we don't have the solutions that we have for broken hands and internal bleeding.
Right. You can't, what we think should fix it is throwing a pill at it or changing your mental thought process. Just try to be happy.
Exactly.
And people who suffer from depression get that nonsense all the time.
That's right. And it's completely unhelpful, because
Absolutely.
the person who is really suffering from depression cannot help how they feel.
Right.
And they can have $1 million and a loving family and everything else and still feel that way.
Yeah.
And it's not because they're assholes. It's because they have an actual mental problem. And that stigma that goes along with that is born out of our fears and our prejudices against what we don't understand.
Right.
And so I think in order to tackle this, we've really got to confront head on that we don't understand it, and we need to understand it.
And I mean, we can get into the social stigma, we can get into the healthcare argument about treating these mental illnesses, but in conjunction with gun laws, I don't know how to connect the two. We need reliable testing. We need some sort of reliable way of determining somebody's mental health and somebody's mental stability, and we do not have that in any way, shape, or form right now. Well, I see this a lot with some of my clients, especially the ones who suffer from epileptic seizures, any kind of seizures actually. When you go in to get your driver's license, that's the question that they ask you. Mm-hmm. Do you have any mental disabilities that could stop you from this? Someone who's a narcoleptic, they probably shouldn't be driving. Someone who's going to randomly have seizures probably shouldn't be driving. We have questionnaires like this, but the thing is, if somebody is just going to fill out a form that says, "Oh no, I'm not crazy," they're going to write that to get a gun.
Of course they are. Yeah, that's a tantamount to no regulation whatsoever.
Right.
We have testing for cars. You know, we bring up the car analogy because it's not a bad one in that you have to pass tests and you have to show some other human being that you know how to do this thing before they're going to trust you with a car.
You have to take a class. You have to renew it.
That's right. The same absolutely is the least we could do in regulating guns.
Right.
And anybody who thinks that this is Obama coming to take your guns, will you please touch reality?
Yeah.
That is just not what's going on. But the Australian solution and increased gun control is a necessary part of the solution to this problem. And we're just going to have to deal with the fact that we are not necessarily the land of the free and the home of the brave when we're running around letting mentally unstable people shoot us and our kids with complete autonomy because we're so busy defending our rights to let that person kill us.
Right.
It gets a little ridiculous. It's almost satirical. It's so ridiculous.
It's hard for me to stay rational about it when it is such an emotional issue. Like I said this the last time we talked about it. People are getting killed in movie theaters, at church, on live TV. We're having a room full of children get slaughtered.
Right.
And, you know, we're outraged. What should we do? What should we do? Oh, well, you can't take guns away. And
then the next day, nobody's thinking about it. Nobody's talking about it.
Done.
Oh, you can't take guns away, and that's it. The end of the conversation.
There's no... Oh, well, if you do try to regulate, people are going to lie. Or if you do try to regulate, it's still going to be out there. If you can't shut them all down, why even bother?
Right. And this is not an unsolvable problem, folks. Yeah. We just haven't come up with a solution yet. We, again, are asking for your comments, your feedback, your ideas about this. I would very much love hearing from you guys and want to know what you think about this and what, if anything, you think might work to resolve this issue. It's, you know, in the end, it's going to be me and thee who come up with the solutions to these things. If we're waiting around for the people in Congress to do it, we're going to be waiting for a good long time.
We're going to get killed by a gun before anything happens.
Yeah, all right. So with that, we're going to be wrapping up the show this week. I wanted to say if you have any email communications for us, you can send it to chris@sensiblyspeaking.com.
Or Ruth@sensiblyspeaking.com.
Email lines are wide open. And we will be back next week. Thank you very much for listening.
And we're going to be closing with some more Pale Blue for you. And thank you guys so much for listening to us again. Have a good one.